Your retirement bonus has been denied due to budget constraints, Human Resources Director Catherine Walsh said, barely looking up from her paperwork. The words were delivered with the cold, sterile precision of a surgeon announcing a terminal diagnosis. No emotion, no apology, just a statement of fact that shattered a lifetime of planning. Furthermore, she continued, her pen scratching across a form, your position will be filled by a logistics consultant to modernize our operations. I sat there in stunned silence, my hands gripping the arms of the uncomfortable plastic chair in her office. The cheap, imitation leather was cool and slick against my sweaty palms. I could feel my knuckles turning white. Modernize our operations? The very operations I had built from the ground up? The systems I had designed, implemented, and refined over nearly 3 decades? 28 years. The number echoed in the cavernous silence of my mind. 28 years I had given to Bramthorne Legal's warehouse operations in Salt Lake City, Utah. I had started there when I was just 35, a single mother with a young son, desperate for a stable job with benefits. Bramthorne Legal was a much smaller firm back then, a local player with big ambitions. I remembered the first warehouse. It was little more than a glorified garage, dusty and disorganized. I had been hired as a simple clerk, but my knack for organization and efficiency hadn't gone unnoticed. Within a few years, I was running the place. I remembered my late husband, Thomas. He was an engineer, a man who believed in contingency plans and a healthy dose of skepticism, especially when it came to corporate promises. Darlene, he told me 15 years ago, during my last major contract negotiation, loyalty is a beautiful thing, but in a boardroom, it's a one-way street. They'll expect it from you, but don't you ever expect it back. Get it in writing. Get everything in writing. His words had been a guiding principle for me. Thomas was gone now, taken by cancer 5 years ago, but his wisdom remained my shield. And this was how they were sending me off. My name is Darlene Whitaker, and at 63 years old, I thought I had seen every corporate betrayal in the book. But this one, this casual, dismissive erasure of my life's work, cut deeper than I ever expected. The retirement bonus I had been counting on, the one written into my contract, the one Thomas had insisted I clarify and lock down, was being swept away like yesterday's dust. Budget constraints, I repeated, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me like a pressure cooker. I forced myself to unclench my hands, to breathe slowly. Panic would do me no good here. Catherine, I have been managing this warehouse since before half the executive team was even hired. My systems have saved this company hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. Catherine finally looked up. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were devoid of empathy. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of professional indifference. She was in her late 30s, with a sharp haircut and an even sharper suit that probably cost more than my first car. She was the new breed of executive, all metrics and buzzwords, with little regard for the human element that made a company tick. Darlene, we appreciate your service, she said, the platitude rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. But times have changed. We need fresh perspectives and modern approaches to logistics management. Her words were like tiny, sharp daggers. Fresh perspectives. As if my decades of experience, of fine-tuning every process, of knowing every single employee by name, meant nothing. As if the accident-free record I had maintained for over 10 years, a point of immense pride for me and my team, was somehow outdated. As if the inventory systems I had personally designed and implemented, the very systems that ensured every legal document, every case file, was tracked, stored, and retrieved with flawless accuracy, were relics of the past. Who is this consultant? I asked, my voice still calm, though I already suspected the answer would irritate me further. I had heard whispers in the break room over the past few weeks. Whispers of a hotshot consultant from some big city firm, a prodigy who was going to revolutionize the way Bramthorne did business. Blake Morrison, from Trenwick Consulting, she replied, and for the first time, a hint of something other than boredom crept into her voice. It was excitement. He specializes in warehouse optimization and digital transformation. Very impressive credentials. Blake Morrison. I had heard the name. Young, flashy, expensive. The type of consultant who promised revolutionary changes while charging premium rates for ideas that anyone with real warehouse experience could have told them for free. And my bonus, I pressed, determined not to let this slide without a fight. The bonus I had earned. Catherine shuffled through her papers again, clearly uncomfortable now. The mask of indifference was cracking, revealing a flicker of unease. As I mentioned, Darlene, budget constraints have made it impossible to honor that particular aspect of your contract. The company is going through some financial restructuring, and non-essential expenditures have been suspended.
Non-essential.
My retirement bonus, earned through nearly 3 decades of dedicated service, of late nights and weekends, of pouring my heart and soul into this place, was now classified as non-essential. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, a familiar feeling I had learned to recognize over the years. It was the same feeling I got when I spotted discrepancies in inventory reports that no one else had noticed, or when I saw safety violations that others had missed. It was the feeling that told me something was very, very wrong. But I kept my expression neutral, even managed a small, tight smile. The relief on Catherine's face was almost comical. She had expected a fight, tears, a scene. She didn't get one. I understand completely, Catherine, I said, my voice smooth as silk. These things happen. Walking back to my office for what would be one of the last times, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. I had started at Bramthorne Legal straight out of high school, working my way up from the mailroom. When they decided to create a dedicated warehouse for their mountains of legal files, they had turned to me. I had watched it grow from that single, dusty location into a network of 4 state-of-the-art warehouses across 4 states, storing everything from archived case files dating back a century to office supplies for over 1,000 employees. My late husband, Thomas, used to joke that I cared more about that warehouse than I did about our living room. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had poured my heart and soul into building something that worked, something that lasted. Every process, every safety protocol, every efficiency improvement bore my fingerprints. The relationships I had built over the years ran deep. Jacob Williams, who started as a floor associate 15 years ago and now managed the entire night shift, had learned everything from me. Patricia Evans, the inventory specialist, a woman with an almost supernatural ability to spot a misplaced file, still used the filing system I had taught her during her first week, 8 years ago. Even the newer employees knew that when they had a problem, they came to Darlene. But it wasn't just about the personal connections.
It was about the systems themselves.
The inventory tracking process I had developed reduced loss and theft by over 30%. The safety protocols I had implemented hadn't just prevented accidents. They had earned the company recognition from the state's Occupational Safety Board for 5 consecutive years. The loading dock scheduling system I had created increased efficiency by 25% while reducing overtime costs. All of this, my entire professional legacy, would now be handed over to Blake Morrison, a consultant who had probably never spent a full day on a warehouse floor in his life. I had seen consultants come and go over the years. They arrived with their PowerPoint presentations and their buzzwords, synergy, paradigm shift, optimization, promising to revolutionize everything. They would spend a few weeks observing, another few weeks analyzing, and then present their findings as if they had discovered something revolutionary. Usually, their recommendations were just variations of systems that were already in place, dressed up in modern terminology and sold back to management at premium prices. The irony was that most of these consultants had no real understanding of the day-to-day challenges of warehouse operations. They saw numbers on spreadsheets, not the human beings who made those numbers work. They understood theory, not practice. But what Catherine Walsh and the executive team didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this day for a very long time. Not this exact scenario, but something like it. I had learned early in my career that in corporate America, loyalty was a one-way street. That was why, 15 years ago, when I had negotiated my last major contract renewal, I had insisted on certain protections. Protections that I had never mentioned to anyone, not even Thomas. Protections that were about to become very, very relevant. As I reached my office, I could already hear Blake Morrison's booming voice carrying down the hallway from the conference room, explaining to a group of managers how he planned to optimize their operational paradigms. The next morning brought Blake Morrison's official introduction to the warehouse staff. At 34 years old, he had the kind of polished confidence that only came from years of telling people how to do jobs he had never actually done himself. His navy suit was perfectly pressed, his hair was professionally styled, and his smile was practiced to convey just the right amount of authority mixed with approachability. "Good morning, everyone," he began, addressing the group of 20 warehouse employees who had gathered in the break room. "I'm Blake Morrison from Trenwick Consulting, and I'm here to help modernize your operations and bring Bramthorne Legal's logistics into the 21st century." I stood at the back of the room, watching the faces of my colleagues. Some looked skeptical, others resigned. They had seen the show before, just with different actors. Blake clicked to his first PowerPoint slide, which showed a generic warehouse layout with arrows and buzzwords like workflow synergy and dynamic inventory flow scattered around it. "What we're looking at here is a complete transformation of your current processes," he announced grandly. "We'll be implementing cutting-edge inventory management software, optimizing your floor layout for maximum efficiency, and establishing new performance metrics that align with industry best practices." Jacob Williams raised his hand. "What about the systems we're already using? Darlene spent years developing our current processes, and they've been working pretty well." Blake's smile never wavered, but I caught the brief flash of irritation in his eyes. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to move beyond," he replied smoothly. His tone was patronizing, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "What worked 10 or 20 years ago simply doesn't cut it in today's competitive environment. We need dynamic systems, real-time analytics, and adaptive workflows. The old way of doing things, with its paper trails and manual processes, is like trying to compete in a Formula One race with a horse and buggy." The room fell silent. Patricia Evans looked like she wanted to say something, but I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. This wasn't the time or place for confrontation. Blake wrapped up his presentation with promises of increased efficiency, reduced costs, and improved working conditions. He scheduled individual meetings with each department head to assess current capabilities and identify optimization opportunities. After the meeting dispersed, several employees approached me privately. They want to know what I thought about Blake's plans, whether I believed his promises, and most importantly, what they should do. "Give him a chance," I told each of them, my voice calm and reassuring. "Change can be good sometimes. Just remember everything you've learned, and don't be afraid to speak up if something doesn't feel right." What I didn't tell them was that I had already set certain wheels in motion. Wheels that Blake Morrison and the executive team at Bramthorne Legal were about to discover had been turning for 15 years. My official last day arrived with all the fanfare of a Tuesday afternoon inventory count. No ceremony, no speeches, just a brief, cool handshake from Catherine Walsh and a standard exit interview form to fill out. After 28 years, I was cleaning out my desk drawers and boxing up the personal items that had made this space feel like a second home. The irony wasn't lost on me that Blake Morrison had scheduled his first major presentation to the executive team for the same day I was walking out the door. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see him setting up his laptop and arranging his charts with the precision of a man who believed his own hype. As I packed the last of my coffee mugs, a gift from the warehouse staff 5 Christmases ago, Jacob Williams appeared in my doorway. "This isn't right, Darlene," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "They're making a huge mistake." "Maybe," I replied, wrapping my favorite mug in tissue paper. "But sometimes, companies need to learn lessons the hard way." Jacob stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Is there anything we can do? The whole crew is upset about this. We've been talking, and we're thinking about going to Catherine Walsh as a group, telling her how much you mean to this place." I appreciated the loyalty, more than he could know, but I knew it would only cause trouble for good people who needed their jobs. "Jacob, I want you to listen to me carefully," I said, looking him straight in the eye. Don't make waves. Don't fight the new systems Blake is implementing. Do your job, do it well, and let the results speak for themselves. He looked confused, as if he had expected me to encourage resistance, or at least express some bitterness about the situation. But I had learned long ago that the best revenge was often the most patient kind. Just trust me, I added, closing the box of personal items. Everything is going to work out exactly as it should. The weeks following my departure unfolded exactly as I had predicted. Blake Morrison dove into his modernization project with the enthusiasm of someone who believed he was pioneering uncharted territory. Reports filtered back to me through former colleagues who still called occasionally to vent their frustrations or seek advice. The first casualties of Blake's revolution were the paper-based backup systems I had meticulously maintained alongside our digital processes. Redundant inefficiency, he had called them during a staff meeting, according to Patricia Evans. Within a week, he had eliminated the manual tracking logs that had served as our safety net for over a decade. The second change was the inventory software. Blake replaced our current system, which I had spent 3 years customizing to fit our specific needs, with a generic, off-the-shelf package that promised seamless integration and real-time analytics. The learning curve was steep, and the frequent glitches caused delays that rippled through the entire operation. But the most telling change was Blake's approach to staff scheduling. He implemented what he called dynamic resource allocation, which was essentially a fancy way of saying he would assign people to different departments based on daily workload projections generated by his new software. I had tried dynamic scheduling early in my career and learned precisely why it didn't work in practice. Warehouse operations required institutional knowledge that couldn't be captured in algorithms. Jacob Williams knew exactly which clients had a tendency to send irregular shipments. Patricia Evans could spot damaged inventory from across the room. Danny Rodriguez, in receiving, could predict weather-related delays 3 days in advance just by watching shipping patterns from the Midwest. But Blake's system treated all workers as interchangeable units, and the results were predictable. Errors increased. Processing time slowed. Customer complaints started trickling in. 3 weeks after my departure, Jacob Williams called me at home on a Friday evening. "Darlene, I don't know what to do," he said, his voice tight with stress. "Everything is falling apart. The new software crashed twice this week, and we lost an entire shipment because nobody knew how to read the modified tracking codes. And Blake is blaming the staff for resistance to change." "How are you holding up personally?" I asked, my own voice calm. "Honestly, I'm thinking about looking for another job. Half the guys on my shift are saying the same thing. This isn't the place we signed up to work for anymore." That was the most dangerous sign of all. Good warehouse employees were hard to find and harder to train. If Blake's changes drove away experienced staff, the damage would compound exponentially. "Jacob, I need you to hang in there a little longer," I said. "I know it's difficult, but trust me when I say that this situation is going to resolve itself soon." "What do you mean?" "Just focus on doing your job as well as you can under the circumstances. Document any problems you encounter, and make sure you're following all safety protocols. And Jacob, when this is over, I think you're going to find that management has a much better appreciation for the people who actually know how to run a warehouse." 2 days later, Patricia called with an update that confirmed my worst fears and my best hopes simultaneously. The new inventory software had miscalculated reorder quantities for 3 major clients, resulting in stock shortages that forced emergency overnight shipping at premium rates. The cost overrun for that single mistake exceeded $10,000. Blake's response was to schedule mandatory retraining sessions for all warehouse staff, as if the problem was their competence rather than his system's design flaws. "He's also bringing in another consultant," Patricia added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Someone to help with change management and staff optimization." More consultants, more expense, more disruption. The spiral was accelerating, exactly as I had seen it happen before at other companies, under other consultants who confused motion with progress. But this time was different. This time, I had been preparing for 15 years. The breaking point came exactly 5 weeks after my retirement, on a Thursday morning that started with what Blake Morrison would later describe as a minor operational hiccup. According to Danny Rodriguez, who called me that afternoon, the hiccup began when Blake's dynamic scheduling system assigned 3 new, temporary workers to the receiving department without any experienced supervision. Jacob Williams had been reassigned to shipping, Patricia Evans was covering for someone in filing, and the regular receiving supervisor was attending one of Blake's mandatory training sessions. The temporary workers, following the new standardized procedures that Blake had implemented, processed an incoming shipment of archived legal documents without checking the special handling requirements. The documents, which included original contracts and court filings dating back 30 years, were stored in the standard, high-humidity section of the warehouse, instead of the climate-controlled archive area. By the time someone noticed the mistake, moisture damage had affected over 200 boxes of irreplaceable legal documents belonging to one of Bramthorne Legal's largest clients, a Fortune 500 company whose retainer alone represented nearly 10% of the firm's annual revenue. The client was not pleased. Blake spent 3 hours in the conference room with the partners, Danny told me. You could hear the shouting through the walls, he'd said. Something about liability exposure and malpractice insurance and potential lawsuits. I felt a familiar mix of sadness and vindication. Sadness because I genuinely cared about Bramthorne Legal and hated to see the company suffer. Vindication because this was exactly the kind of preventable disaster that experienced warehouse management was designed to avoid. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Catherine Walsh. Her voice carried a strain I had never heard before. Darlene, please, tell me there's some way we can resolve this amicably, she said, without preamble. What do you mean? I asked, genuinely curious about her definition of amicable. The partners are concerned about the financial implications of this clause. They're asking whether there might be room for negotiation. I considered her request carefully. The truth was I didn't need $400,000. My retirement savings were adequate, my house was paid off, and my needs were simple. But this wasn't really about the money anymore. It was about principle, respect, and the value of institutional knowledge. Catherine, I spent 28 years building systems that worked, I said calmly. Systems that kept people safe, kept costs down, and kept clients happy. Your company just paid a consultant an enormous fee to recommend implementing the exact same systems I designed 15 years ago. I understand your frustration. This isn't about frustration, I interrupted gently. This is about honoring contracts and recognizing value. The clause exists because I saw this exact scenario coming 15 years ago. What would it take to settle this quietly? She asked, her voice a near whisper. I already knew my answer. Payment in full, as specified in the contract.
Plus Blake Morrison's immédiate termination.
Plus my retirement bonus, which should never have been denied in the first place. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know about how desperate the situation had become. By Friday afternoon, my bank account showed a deposit of $423,000. Blake Morrison had been terminated that morning, effective immediately. My original retirement bonus had been processed and would arrive within 10 business days. But the real satisfaction came from a phone call I received that evening from Jacob Williams. Darlene, I don't know what you did, he said, his voice a mixture of awe and relief. But Blake is gone. And they're asking the warehouse staff to go back to using your old systems until they can find a permanent replacement for him. And how does that feel? I asked, a genuine smile spreading across my face. Like coming home, he said. The lesson was simple. Experience has value, loyalty should be reciprocated, and contracts should be read carefully before they're signed. Bramthorne Legal had learned all 3 lessons the expensive way, but they had learned them thoroughly. As I looked toward the future, a future made significantly more comfortable by their costly education, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. My greatest professional victory had come not from building something new, but from having the foresight to protect something I had already built. Sometimes the best revenge truly was a dish served cold and garnished with compound interest.